We've been listening to the funeral service for former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who died of COVID-19 complications last month. Former presidents, including former President Barack Obama, as well as former President George W. Bush, also First Ladies in attendance as well. The current president also all in attendance as well. We just heard from his son, the Honorable Michael K. Powell, his voice shaking at times while speaking warmly about his father, saying he and his sisters were raised under the stars, while highlighting General Powell's 4-star rank. We now go to our Ariana Manise. She is outside that cathedral. She's been there all morning. She's going to give us an update. Ariana, are you there?
Yes, Tashani, a very touching and personal yet moving ceremony here at the Washington National Cathedral. As you mentioned, we just heard from Powell's son, Michael Powell, where he spoke about the memories that he has of his father as a very loving and strong man. He spoke about him, how admired he was on the public stage, but also spoke about some very personal memories that he had of his father, some very touching ones, when he spoke about the time where his father fixed his 1962 Impala. Said after Powell was done working on his vehicle, it was never able to go forward again. They ended up donating that vehicle. But he also spoke about the time when Colin Powell took his hand as he laid into the hospital bed. Michael said he suffered a very great pain from an accident, and he says that Powell stood next to him in his hospital bed, took his hand, a hand that showed him love, but also a hand that was on the world stage and signed treaties. Michael also spoke about the final moment of Powell's life, where he said that he was in the position of his father. He took his hand in those last moments. Now, Tashani, this is a very large-scale funeral, but still very private. It's not considered a state funeral, but we also see current and former presidents, President Joe Biden, the First Lady, as well as President Obama, Michelle Obama, President Bush, as well as the First Lady, as well as Secretary Hillary Clinton, President Bill Clinton. He was invited to this ceremony, but due to his own health issues, he was unable to attend. We have a guest list with between 800 to 1,000 people here at the Washington National Cathedral. This ceremony is expected to last for about 30 more minutes here in the nation's capital. Back to you, Tashani.
Yeah, the National Cathedral in Washington, Ariana, it's the second largest cathedral in the country, which is clear as to how it can accommodate so many dignitaries, former heads of states, as well as family and friends, all in attendance for a man who served our country for nearly a half-century. The 4-star general, also the first black person to serve as Secretary of State, as well as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We know that the service is also being presided by Bishop Michael Curry, who married Prince Harry and Meghan Markle as well. As you mentioned, yeah, which is just a very familiar and comforting voice. We remember that during their wedding, so we're interested in hearing how he honors the former Secretary of State, as well as the former retired Army general as well. Have you seen any folks coming in and out, Ariana?
Where we're standing, we actually have the hearse right behind me over my shoulder. This was the hearse that carried the casket into this very beautiful cathedral. As you can see on your screen, we saw a few attendees. Most of the presidents, they arrived in the back of this cathedral. It's a very large complex here in the nation's capital. As you see on your screen, COVID protocols are still in place, but behind those masks, you still see some diplomats, as well as Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's in attendance, as well as the first black Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. When Powell passed, we heard him speak about how he saw Powell as a mentor, yet a friend, but always available to take a moment to provide guidance. So it just speaks to the testament of the man that he was, an American hero, but also a man that embodied black excellence. This is such a large cathedral, but you're seeing these seats filled as everyone here in Washington, diplomats, dignitaries, they want to be in this Cathedral to pay their last respects to this remarkable man, Tashani.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the son of Jamaican immigrants, his son Michael, spoke about how to shame the family was the ultimate sin you could possibly do. But just a true American hero, also the epitome of what the American dream is all about. Starting off as an ROTC cadet, rising up in the ranks to become the first, again, black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also the youngest as the chairman as well. He also presided over the U.S. invasions of Panama and Somalia as well, also the Middle East later on. Again, he also later served as Secretary of State under President George W. Bush, as well as his father as well. I mean, he served under multiple administrations, but both George W. Bush Sr. As well as his son as well. And I want to read something from former President George Bush. He wrote a very moving statement on his website. He said, "Laura and I are deeply saddened by the death of Colin Powell. He was a great public servant. Starting with his time as a soldier during Vietnam, many presidents relied on him for counsel and experience." And just basically said that he started as a national security advisor under President Reagan as well, and then going on to discuss his many accomplishments as well.
Yeah, definitely a remarkable man. And as I mentioned, this is not a state funeral. This is a very private ceremony. So the family put this guest list together, and you just look at the cathedral, dignitaries, diplomats, people notable here in the nation's capital from both sides of the aisle. As I mentioned, it speaks to the man that he is. We heard from Madeleine Albright and also Richard Armitage, who says that are there any more men like Colin Powell here in the nation's capital willing to work with Democrats as well as Republicans? As you mentioned, he served under multiple administrations. So as I mentioned, this ceremony is expected to wrap up in about 30 minutes. Still a very moving and a solemn day, but it's also wonderful and remarkable to hear some personal memories from his son, Tashani.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And his son spoke on that. He said, "It's up to us. If there are more men like my father, it is up to us to create those men and also to highlight those men." I also, under former President George W. Bush, he also said that Colin Powell was a favorite of presidents, earning the Presidential Medal of Freedom not once, but twice. I mean, it just talks about such a highly respected man, not only at home, but also abroad as well.
Yes, definitely on the world stage. You hear from Madeleine Albright, where she spoke about how she had the opportunity to sit with him at the table. She knew him on a professional as well as a personal level. And when he was named Secretary of State, she mentioned how he evaded his security just to drive himself over to her house just to sit at the table with her to start working on a peaceful transition of power. And he was known as a very approachable man here in Washington, in a place that's filled with much structure, I would say, here in the nation's capital. So taking this time just to remember a man who works with Republicans as well as Democrats kind of gives us a moment to reflect and go back to say maybe we need to move forward and go back to a Washington where we saw both sides working together and willing to just have a respectable conversation, Tashani.
Yeah, absolutely. A man that will be dearly missed, not only by his family, of course, but just all Americans and everyone that had an opportunity to be in his presence or to serve under him. A much respected and admired man. Ariana, thank you so much.